Thanks.
The next is Lee Robinson, representing Robinson's Bay Ratepayers and Residents Association, as well as a personal submission.
Yeah, he's also speaking of the lines.
Oh, and I've now been told that you are, oh yes, and I should have read this, you're speaking on behalf of Ross Blank's submission 1071 as well.
Thanks, Your Worship. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I have with me Chris Moore, who's on our association as well, who has a submission. So I've already lodged the submission on behalf of the association, and I will simply speak to this and make the following points. For 20 years, Akaroa has suffered water shortages, and the council, in our view, has done nothing to redress it. Pleas such as requesting council to impose a condition that water storage tanks be installed by residents on building permit applications has for years fallen on deaf ears. In the summer months, water shortages have become the norm. Here we are, a month off the shortest day, and there are still watering restrictions at the highest level being imposed in Akaroa. People have developed properties with landscaping covenants and requirements to maintain aesthetic gardens, and landscaping plans are forbidden by the same regulatory authority from watering them, and they are simply dying. We know as a matter of fact that 69% and possibly up to 80% of the wastewater system that accumulates in the wastewater pipes is ground or stormwater. And yet we have the council building a massive infrastructure for a cost of $70 million, and we know it'll be more, to take more than 2/3 of the usable and potentially potable water into a sewerage system. In our view, it is madness. The new water services bill that is before Parliament and will become law in the next 2 or 3 years will require national standards as to how we deal with water, save it and utilise it. This proposal by the council is yet another short-sighted stopgap measure without taking a look at the entire larger picture. Filtration is going to be the way to go if we look at countries in the States and what happens in Israel, and I'll come to that in a minute. In my youth, I remember the then Mayor of Auckland, Sir Dovemeyer Robinson, thumping the table at City Council meetings, warning his own council that if they didn't act and install light rail or other alternative transportation systems in Auckland, in 50 years' time, Auckland transport would be a mess. How right he was. And yet 50 years later, we have a territorial authority again failing to look at the big picture and put in place a long-term plan. Again, in my youth, we were met at the entrance to Akaroa, this province's playground, by a rubbish dump, seagulls, stench, smoke, and nothing short of an eyesore. And now we have a council having consented a waste disposal unit 8 metres high, sitting in the same place on Akaroa's waterfront. How short-sighted is this council in imposing that position? Together with sewerage ponds at the top of the hill before you descend into the playground of Akaroa Bay. Israel reproduces 75% of its wastewater as potable water for its community and its citizens. And yet we continue to muddle on, spend money on expensive infrastructure that in 10 or 15 years' time is going to be a white elephant. Quite apart from the above issues, the proposal involves placing a massive storage tank up the valley at the head of a harbour on the supposed pretext that it's going to irrigate native trees. The evidence before the council hearing that manuka, kanuka and other large native trees that are intended to form a canopy and therefore dissipate heavy rainfall and avoid saturation of soils was clearly those evidence that those trees and species will not survive because of the nitrates in the soil from the wastewater irrigation. And we saw that from a test done on a plot of natives in Devotional. The whole purpose of the planting and lost and it fails. The point was completely ignored. Nitrates will end up in the ground, they'll end up in the inner harbour, and it'll be affecting fishing and whitebait stocks for which this bay is well known. The plea of the association is simply this: council use common sense, fix the infrastructure, get rid of 69 to 70% of good water in the underground water pipes, and by the time you've done that, there will probably be a water services bill that will provide national standards for saving water and dealing with our wastewater properly. And we will have further water supply to cover the shortages that already exist. We are not advocating returning to the insulting practice of disposing untreated or poorly treated wastewater into the harbour. What we're advocating is for the council to take a long-term view for a change and serve our communities properly. Thank you.
So I just want to re-emphasise a couple of key points that is included in Lee's commentary there. The first is Akaroa wastewater. So recently the council approved the Akaroa wastewater project, and in that approval it resolved that an 80% reduction in I&I be achieved. The current budget does not reflect that decision. The money previously budgeted for a 20% reduction is now being expected to produce that 80% reduction. That's impossible. Therefore, we urge Council to increase the budget to the appropriate level to allow the pipe network to be repaired so that Council's expectations on the 80% reduction in I&I can be achieved, which will then result in lower capital cost overall and also quickly improve the health of Akaroa Harbour. The second point I just want to dwell on briefly is the Akaroa drinking water. And as we all know, Akaroa has had a terrible summer. In fact, for the last 20 years it's had terrible summers. Therefore, we urge Council to immediately put in place a plan for groundwater exploration and drilling for wells around the inner harbour. This must be a high priority and the necessary funding should be allocated immediately. Community consultation has shown overwhelming support for the reuse of wastewater to augment Akaroa's water supply. The third point is the Akaroa Service Centre, and that we are against the proposed closure of the Akaroa Service Centre. This provides an important service to the Akaroa community and makes no sense at all to close it. The fourth point was the land drainage targeted rate, which we are also against, primarily because there was no information given as to what impact it would be on our current rates. Until we know that financial impact on our current rates, we are not in a position to say one way or the other.